What is up, guys? Welcome to my Arcane Mage guide for Midnight. So the Arcane Mage actually changed quite a bit. The spec has become a lot simpler overall compared to previous expansions, but there are still a few mechanics that are really important to understand if you want to get the most out of the spec. So in this guide, I'm going to walk you through everything you need to know to get started with the Arcane Mage. We go over the talents, the stat priority, some important gear choices, and then we break down the core gameplay and the rotation step by step. I'll also slow down the gameplay during the opener so you can clearly see what's happening and why certain abilities are used in specific situations. As always, if you like this video or if you find it useful, please consider liking and subscribe. It would really help the channel growing. And now let's get started. So let's start with the talents. Starting with the class tree. So the class talents received quite a few changes in Midnight. A lot of defensive talents were removed and replaced with mostly utility options. We are by far the most squishiest class in the game in my opinion right now. Spells like Mirror Image and Greater Invis are still available, but since the defensive components were removed, they were much more situational and mainly useful in certain Mythic Plus scenarios, for example. There are also a couple of new choice notes. The first one is Time Walk versus Temporal Realignment. In most situations I recommend Time Walk since it improves your auto-time gameplay and it gives you movement speed, but Temporal Realignment can act as a kind of a cheat death if you drop very low on health. I don't know if this is going to be viable in higher keys, let's see. The second choice node is Spatial Manipulation versus Reflection. So most of the time you'll want the Spatial Manipulation for the extra shimmer charge since the additional ability is very valuable. Let's go into the spec talents. So the Arcane talent tree was simplified quite a bit and now mainly focuses on generating and spending Arcane charges efficiently. Many of the old Arcane charge refund mechanics were removed, which makes the gameplay loop much easier to track compared to previous expansion, like with Glorious, Incandescence, and other buffs you want to track. Yeah. So overall, the spec feels a lot cleaner now, since you no longer have to track a large number of buffs at the same time. What is new that we have the Apex talents. One important talent to mention here is Touch of the Archmage. This talent increases the damage your target takes from you while Touch of the Mage is active. The important detail is that Arcane Barrage damage is calculated when the spell is cast, which means you always want to apply Touch of the Mage first and then cast Arcane Barrage to fully benefit from the damage increase. So there is no longer a spell queue that we can do. And we have the hero talents. For hero talents, we are playing Spellslinger. This is the most broken spec right now. It is better than Sun Fury. This hero talent tree resolves around generating arcane splinters. So many of your abilities like Arcane Blast or Arcane Orb generate these splinters, and they end up contributing a noticeable portion of your overall damage. One of the most important talents here is Polished Focus. This talent changes how you use Arcane Barrage, because casting Barrage at around 20 Arcane Salvo stacks increases its damage and refunds some of those stacks. Because of that, when playing Spellslinger, you generally want to hold on your Arcane Barrage until you reach about 20 Arcane Salvo stacks. Next, let's talk about the gear, stat priority, and what you should craft early in the season. So, stat priority. Your most important stat is Intellect, obviously, since it directly increases the damage of all your abilities. For secondary stats, Mastery is generally your strongest stat since it scales extremely well with arcane damage and the burst windows, and it also gives you mana regeneration. After that, you usually want Haste, which helps smooth out the rotation and allows you to generate and spend arcane changes faster. Crit and Verse fall slightly behind, but their value can still shift depending on your exact gear setup. You would have to sim your character for that exact amount, yeah, later in the expansion. When it comes to the trinkets, there are a few strong options we have right now. So the Locus Walker Ribbon is a passive trinket that grants an intellect buff, which grows stronger the longer you stay in combat. Another very strong option, maybe the best option for Arcane Mage, is Velgar Final Stare. The Raid Trinket is a 1.5 minute cooldown on use that grants a large amount of mastery and lines up perfectly with the Arcane Surge. And finally, there's the Gaze of the Alnseer, another passive trinket that can randomly grant intellect and performs very well overall. That are the trinkets that you want to aim. Crafted gear, the best performing embellishments right now are double Arcane Weave lining. These can be crafted on any armor piece, but it's usually best to put them on low slot budget slots like cloak or the wrists. Yeah? Alternatively, if you want to start strong in the expansion, you can craft a weapon early in the season, and this can also be very strong. Stuff like Arcane provides a huge amount of stats and is often one of the biggest upgrades you can early get on. So now let's talk about one of the core mechanics of Arcane Mage in Midnight, which is Arcane Salvo. So Arcane Salvo is the essential main buff you're building during combat. You generate these stacks primarily through abilities like Arcane Blast or Arcane Orb, and through various Arcane Splinter interactions. These stacks can go up to 20, and once you reach high stacks, your Arcane Barrage becomes significantly stronger. And a large portion of your damage actually comes from consuming those stacks at the right moment. So the new Arcane Mage Midnight build is all about building Arcane Salvo stacks and releasing them at 20 stacks with Arcane Barrage. The general gameplay loop of Arcane Mage is now pretty straightforward. First, you generate Arcane Charges using abilities like Arcane Blast or Arcane Orb. At the same time, you're building Arcane Salvo stacks through these abilities and Splinter interactions, which are random. And once you reach about 20 stacks, you use Arcane Barrage to consume them and deal a large burst of damage. After that, you rebuild your charges again and repeat the cycle. Alright guys, let's get into the priority list. We want to cast Arcane Orb whenever we've just cast the Arcane Barrage with 20 stacks and we have a clear casting. We don't want to press the Arcane Orb if we don't have a clear casting. Yeah? We always want to cast Arcane Barrage if we have 20 stacks of Arcane Salvo, so that we don't overkill. Otherwise, we will just cast Arcane Blast or Arcane Pulse in AOE situations. And if we don't have mana for everything left, we just use the Arcane Barrage as a filler until our next search comes up. Let's talk about the opener for the Arcane Mage. So, if the fight just starts and we're sitting at 0 Arcane Salvo stacks, we want to build the stacks first. We can cast Arcane Pulse in AoE situations and Orb once and pulse our way up to 20 stacks. It doesn't matter if we use an Orb here, we just use it to generate our Arcane Salvo stacks faster. Once we reach 20 stacks, we go into our Magi cooldown window with Surge, into Touch of the Magi, into Barrage. Alright, let's start. We start with Time Warp, we blast our way up with Arcane Pulse, we Orb once until we reach 20 Salvo stacks. Now we cast Arcane Surge, into Touch, into Barrage, into Orb. Barrage, Orb, Barrage, Orb, Barrage, Arcane Pulse, since we don't have clear casting. Barrage, Pulse, Pulse, Barrage, Pulse, Pulse, Barrage, Orb. Now we enter our filler window until our Touch of the Magi comes back up. We will just spam Arcane Pulse. When we have 20 stacks again, we go into the Salvo, into Orb, when we have a clear casting proc. Otherwise we just cast Arcane Pulse. Sometimes you end up with one target left, then it would be better to just Arcane Blast to save mana. But if there's more than 2 targets left, it is always worth to cast Arcane Pulse. One more detail worth to notice about is when to use the clear casting proc with a specific amount of Arcane Salvo charges, because if you cast an Orb with clear casting, it gives you exactly 6 stacks of Arcane Salvo. So you want to cast the Orb when you have 14 or less stacks of Arcane Salvo, so that you don't overcap. If you have 16, for example, you can cast 2 Arcane Pulses and then Barrage into Orb. That is the best choice to not overcap. So to maximize the output, we want to make sure that we don't overcap on anything, especially on Arcane Salvo stacks, and we want to use them as fast as possible as soon as you reach 20. Here we go into our search window again. And this is the whole AOE-Rotation, guys. Same principle goes for the single target rotation. We just swap the Arcane Pulse with the Arcane Blast. So we want to blast our way up to 20 stacks before we enter our major cooldown rotation. Of course, if there is an AoE fight with a lot of adds or 2 or 3 or more targets at the same time, we can switch to a game pulse. We don't have time warp right now, but it is fine. We blast our way up to 20 stacks. Here in this case I don't use orb because I started with 10, otherwise I would have orb once. Now we go search, touch, barrage into orb, blast once, barrage, orb, blast once, could have cancelled that, barrage, orb, blast, barrage, blast, blast, blast. We enter our filler, we just blast our way up, barrage, proc into orb. We don't have any mana issues here. On the single target side, we can just spam Arcane Blast and build our salvo stacks way up again until we enter the filler rotation. And same principle goes on and on. The single target, you can always reach 20 salvo stacks first before you go into your major cooldown windows again. So you have the mana for it and you can go for it. Last but not least, I want to provide you with some useful tips when you play Mythic Plus in the future. First, we can use our punching bag before we start the run to build up our arcane salvo stacks. This works because this is static and the buff does not run out. It always stays at 20. So if you don't want to blast your way up on the first pull, you can just farm for the punching bag. I don't know how you get it now. I think I have it, but I don't know why. But you would have to check that. Point 2 is to manage your salvo stacks correctly. If possible, you can take some salvo stacks into the next pull. So for example, if a pack is about to die and you have about 14, 15 salvo stacks left, before you use your barrage to consume those stacks, take it into the next pack, because if your major cooldowns are coming up, you don't have to blast your way up to 20 salvo stacks again and you can use them right away. The third tip is using mirror images, for example, at the tank pulls, because if you use your mirror images, you don't produce threat. And if you don't produce threat, you can freely start stacking up your salvo stacks while your tank is gathering the mobs, and you win a few seconds for your burst windows. That's it for today, guys. I hope you liked the video. If you find this guide useful, please leave a like and subscribe. It really help out my channel growing. I will constantly post new videos about playing Mage in the new Midnight expansion, mainly doing Mythic Plus runs, and I will also doing the raid that is coming up on Wednesday. And I wish you all a very good remaining week and a good weekend. I love you all, and cheers.